Come on, peeps. Let's hope
Happy
for some good
Friday,
stuff.
everyone. Welcome to another Diablo IV Campfire Chat. My name is Adam Fletcher. I am the Associate Director of Community here on Diablo. Joined here by Joe Shelley, Game Director for Diablo IV. Mr. Joe Pipora, which you guys know of, and Joe as well, I guess. I mean, familiar faces.
Sure.
Associate Director for Diablo IV, and of course, Adam Jackson. Brand new face here. He is our lead class designer for Diablo IV.
Joe's just staring at the camera,
we have a lot
man.
to talk about today.
Yes.
In fact, just note, there's two Adams, two Joes, so this is going to get really confusing here. And we were thinking about, like, maybe we do like a battle royale or something like that to, you know, determine who talks next or whatever. But I will say we actually do have a lot to talk about. In fact, I would almost say this is like dev update stream worthy,
It's
as
at least
opposed
Campfire
to
Plus.
Campfire Plus.
Yeah,
easily.
Plus.
Yeah.
It's like new game plus or whatever.
Okay.
But we do have a lot to talk about, specifically around patch 1.1.1. Did I say enough ones?
Yeah.
You did.
111? 111, patch 111.
We did.
We are going to talk about some balance changes that are going to be coming to that patch. And of course, we're also going to be talking about the dates of when that patch is actually going to be hitting, along with when players will be seeing the patch notes, which will be well before the actual patch does actually.
Okay, so they actually have a
hit, but
date,
we'll talk about
which
that
is
here in a
good.
second. I know we do want to jump right into it because we do have a ton to talk about. So I will actually throw it over here to Adam Jackson because I know he wants to talk a little bit about kind of like the class balance and what we're thinking about for 111.
Yeah, totally. Glad to be here. We have a lot to talk about. So first I want to kind of frame this in our goals and what we're going to be doing in this patch in the immediate future, and then talking a little bit about kind of how the class team feels about classes and kind of what we're thinking in a more mid to long-term space. So for this patch, we've got a lot going on. One of our goals is kind of, I think, obvious to the community. We want to kind of improve the effectiveness and the fun of the sorcerer and the barbarian.
Thank
so
you.
we've got a lot of changes coming in there, and I think
Bring
I
it
want
on,
to frame
baby.
this in two ways of kind of what we're thinking about the sorcerer and then what we're thinking about with the barbarian.
Buffs, that's all I want to hear.
Because they both have, you know, kind of different things going on.
Buff,
For
buff,
the
buff.
sorcerer in this patch, we're focusing on reducing something that we call kiss curse mechanics, which is kind of, I know, a very designery term. But it's this idea that we give you a really cool power effect, and then we kind of take something away or make it nerfed or nerf
Yes.
some other part of you in some way, usually for balance reasons,
Get
to
rid
make
of
sure
that.
that it's not just, you know, out of control and power.
Yeah, usually the idea there is like, to your point, it's like, so we really have like, you know, 20% we can
Yeah,
afford to
your
give
ice
you, but if you
shards
take
hit
10%
5 more
something else away,
times,
we
but
can
you
give
do
30%
30%
or
less
25%,
damage.
feel a little
What
bit
the
better about
fuck?
Exactly. Usually it's to sell a fantasy in a really strong way, but we can't like do that justifiably without just breaking the mechanic. But we found out in a lot of ways we've been a little too harsh with that, and so we're going to try and reduce or remove that in some cases. And then the other one is late game survivability. We know that the sorcerers typically have a tough time, you know, when they start pushing those later night periods.
It's probably
nightmare
Twitch
dungeon
matches.
tiers. And so we're going to be looking at ways to increase that specifically. And an example of that kiss curse mechanic is the serpentine aspect. If you know that one, it's the one where you can spawn an additional hydra, but it reduces the duration of your hydras. That's just no longer going to reduce the duration, it's actually going to increase it. So that's an example of something. We'll go into more detail later.
We may be going fire
For
sword,
the
baby. Let's
barbarian,
go.
We're focusing on improving the early game and making it feel better and just more fluid. We're going to be improving the fury generation that you get from your basic skills. And then we're also looking at the late game for the barbarian by making a lot of their uniques more attractive and effective. So you're going to see later when we go through the notes that you know, we're going to be changing around usually about one affix per unique from something that really isn't that attractive for players to something that they really, really want, which we think will help make those items really exciting.
Now, when we make changes to items, specifically...
Wait a
items
minute,
like
that's all
unique,
for the sorc? Just the hydra
many of
change?
these changes
No, right.
only take effect on new items, right? Like, I think we have an example of the Hellhammer here.
Yeah, kind of. It's a little bit more complex than that. So we're going to delve into one of our examples of what we're updating here. But when we update a unique item, we actually update Hellhammer in two different ways. So we're increasing the duration that the ground is going to be ignited and burning, and then we're also increasing the damage. And that's the actual unique effect power, you know, the exciting thing that the item does. But you can see here on Hellhammer, we're also doing another change where we're actually granting you a bonus critical strike damage and removing the bonus damage to crowd control enemies, right? So on the left, what you see here, when you log into the game, you know, after this patch, the left version is what you're going to get. So you're not going to get the critical strike damage change where the actual item affix there, the rule changed, but you are going to get the updates to the upheaval, lasting longer and doing more damage. On the right, when you find your new items after the patch, you're going to get the new affixes, the new rules.
They're going to make you re-grind it. Ouch.
So
Ouch.
new versions of these items will have all of the buffs we're talking
New
about.
versions will have everything new.
People are going
And
to
the old
be
versions will
pissed.
get the new stuff on the actual legendary effects, but then you won't have the new item stats on it.
Got it. Thank you.
People are going to be pissed.
Yeah, so going back to kind of other things that we're looking at. So that's the sorcerer and the barbarian what we're focusing on. Then generally across all classes, we're doing a few other things as well. We're looking at builds that aren't really hitting a high enough power level, and we're going to be just buffing them and increasing the power of them, so they should feel better and be more competitive. We're also going to be looking at increasing the attractiveness of kind of uniques across the board. We're focusing on sorcerer and barbarian for this patch, but we actually believe that we can do this kind of thing across the board. There's a lot of uniques that we think aren't really hitting the mark. It's something that's kind of a tough thing that we talk about a lot on the team, because the roles and the things that the uniques have as far as their item power are all fixed, right? They can't re-roll different stats all over the place. So we could very easily just make all uniques really good by putting all the best stats on the items, right? That's an easy thing to do for us. But we kind of have a push and pull there where we don't want to just make all of them clearly the best items in the game because they have all the best stats and they have really good powers. We want there to be something that's really unique and attractive about them, and you have to kind of think of how you're going to fit these into your character's build. But we think that we are just not hitting the mark on a lot of them, so we're boosting them a little bit and then just kind of seeing how that goes.
So
Next,
there's
we're gonna
other
be looking
changes
at
coming to
opening
the
up
sword.
build-specific designs
but
to
just
be more
not-
widely useful. So
They're
there's
not
a
being
lot of
specific on right
effects
now.
on legendary powers and in other places where this effect only works in a very narrow use case, like only on a single skill or a single group of skills, or we're using a certain proc to get it. And in many cases where it's going to open that up to be more widely usable so that players can actually use them in more different builds or different ways. One example of this that we'll go over later is Chain Lightning's upgrade, Greater Chain Lightning. Currently it gives you the bounces of Chain Lightning do bonus damage when it bounces off of you. And we're going to change that so that it just does bonus damage when it bounces off of anything. So instead of being kind of a narrow use case where you're only using it like on a boss or a single target enemy and getting value, you'll just get it a lot more often now.
Yeah, it feels like a much better lightning range skill now in that way. It's easier for me to clear
Interesting.
packs, so it's good. I like
Okay.
that.
Yeah, totally. So that's kind of what we're looking at for this patch.
Okay, so we talked last week about sort of our things that we want to do, like going forward in the game, other things we want to do. Not all of that stuff is in this patch.
Yeah,
right?
no, we have a lot of talks on our team. We have a lot of things that we're thinking about and going on. I thought it'd be really good also to kind of talk a little bit about how we feel about more longer term goals and things about the game. So these aren't coming in this patch, but things that we're thinking about that'll come in the future that the team's kind of focus on. The first one is kind of finding ways to bring different types of damage closer together. As I'm sure many of you in the community know, vulnerable and crit are really, really strong right now. Kind of a lot of the meta is about, you make an enemy vulnerable and then you do bonus damage to them and then you stack as much crit strike chance and crit damage as you can and then you blow them up, right? Our game actually was foundationally made with other types of builds that aren't only those in mind, right? We have like damage over time or dot damage, things like Firewall or Shadow Necro does a lot of this. We also have Overpower as a mechanic in our game, and these other different ways to build your character, we want them to have parity with vulnerable and crit damage. So we're going to be trying to find, our goal is to find a way, and we're working on it right now, that all those different ways of dealing damage have a lot of parity. So no matter if you're an Overpower build or a crit build or a damage over time build, you'll be relatively equal in power to all of the other different types of ways to play. So another one that we're looking at is adding scaling
That's
to
interesting.
builds and effects that don't really scale very well in the game. This is something that I think is a big opportunity for us to open up just excitement in different builds in the game. And what I mean by this is we have a lot of legendary powers and effects that spawn a new thing. An example of this is like on the Barbarian, there's some legendary powers that spawn earthquakes or dust devils. Another one is the Necromancer has things that leave shadow trails on the ground that deal damage. And these things, they deal what we call flat damage, which is we give it a damage number, and then that's how much it does, and then that damage number kind of scales with player level. But what we find is that a lot of these things are really good in the early and mid game when they drop, but then when you get to the really late game, they kind of fall off really hard. And what we want to do is find ways to add scaling so that the player can opt into making a build out of these things. So if I want to be an Earthquake Barbarian or a Dust Devil Barbarian, I can actually do that, and it's supported by the game. So that's something that we're really excited about because we think that'll open up a lot more build possibilities.
Oh yeah, that
Ultimates
should
are
have been a
kind of in
focus
this
from the
range as
beginning.
well.
I
It's a
would
more
think,
long-term goal.
right?
But similarly, a lot of ultimates are really strong in the early and mid game. You take it, it blows up the screen, feels great. And then in the late game, a lot of ultimates that we see that are used are just used because they buff the player in some way.
Yeah, they don't blow up the screen the same way anymore.
Yeah, right. I want you to be excited to use Bone Storm because Bone Storm is awesome, not
Yeah.
because it gives you a buff, right? Or
Yeah.
Grizzly Rage or other ones, right? So that's kind of something that we're thinking about in the mid to long term to make the game kind of open up and have more builds available.
So we've been talking here a little bit about sort of our philosophy here. We're about to get into patch notes. We're about to talk about Sorcerer. But we thought that it was important to talk a little bit about this philosophy, both because we want to be very transparent in terms of like how we're thinking about the game and what kinds of, like why we're making changes, both so that when you see changes, you can understand what we're thinking, like what we're going for.
Yes.
And also
that'd be
so
nice.
that we can incorporate feedback from the community, feedback from you into these kinds of changes.
Yeah, and that goes down even to the format for this particular live stream, right?
Yeah.
So like we're gonna go through a lot of details really, really soon, which I think people are really excited about. I hope people are really excited about because we're gonna have a lot of those. And then afterwards, we want to hear back from the community about like how how this worked. Like, was this the best way to get this information? Did you get a lot of good data from us, and do you understand why we're doing making the changes that we are? Right, and to Joe's point, again, it is really useful for you to understand these things. It's going to help with the feedback that you give us back.
Well,
whether
yeah.
we're hitting it or not.
Yeah,
Knowing
and this
we're
is-
getting
this is
nerfed
like
for a
multi-stage
specific
type of
reason
thing.
as to
So
why we're getting
we're actually
nerfed
gonna,
and what that's
you guys
going
are
to
about
do
to see a ton
is
of slides here
obvious.
in a second, going through pretty much all the different detailed balance changes that are coming across the classes. But then, like we said, like we do plan on releasing patch notes so that you guys can actually read them in more detail. And in those patch notes will be
I like his Diablo
additional
shirt. It's
information
actually
such
kinda
as like all the bug fixes and so forth that will be coming in with the game itself with 1.1.1. So.
Do we know when we're getting the? We plan on releasing those?
So we are. Look at this. We had
I'm just
planned
asking-
this to
I'm
talk
asking the
about it
question.
later,
Sorry,
and
man.
now like.
Oh, sorry.
I know now you're just gonna spoil it. We're actually gonna release patch notes, full patch notes. You guys will see these patch notes first here on the stream, but we will release patch notes next Wednesday on
Okay.
August 2nd, so that everyone will end up seeing it. We'll talk about the patch date here at the end of the stream. We're closer to the end of the stream.
Yeah, so just wait for the end of the stream. We'll talk about when that's going to go out.
But what we do want to do is we do want to jump straight into the balance changes and so forth.
Team
and we
Grey,
do
Team
want to
Black,
start
yeah.
off with
That's
the
true,
sorcerer.
dude.
So
Look at
we have
that.
a lot of different
And
slides.
two people are
and
wearing
changes here that
gray,
we do
two
wanna
people are wearing
detail.
black.
So,
It's so weird.
Adam, I know wants to go through them all.
Yeah, totally. So I think
Okay,
what I'll do
so-
is just give you a few moments to look at the screen and kind of see what we're doing, and then talk high level about some of the bigger changes here. So flickering firebolt is one we're changing firebolt to basically just generate mana when you hit an enemy. Before it was only generated when you hit a burning enemy. So when you would just try and cast firebolt, without doing anything else, you would just always miss the first hit of getting the mana, which felt bad a lot.
that always felt bad.
Yeah, it's this negative feedback loop, so we're just going to make it, feel nicer. You still feel nice about burning things and piercing, but you just
Interesting,
get
okay.
it more often. Probably another big one here is the greater chain lightning change I talked about, where every time that it bounces, the next hit would deal damage rather than only bouncing off of you. And then we're also buffing the other choice for destructive chain lightning, so you get more crackling energies. Next one, let's go to the passives. These are all the key passives at the bottom of the skill tree.
Increased to 10%.
Isu's Ferocity is a big one. You're going to see a lot of these kinds of changes where it used to work kind of in a more narrow use case, and now it works in a case that it didn't, so that's just generically good.
Okay.
This one, it used to not really work on bosses very well. You had to kill enemies by critting them to get the bonus, and now you can also get it during boss fights by just hitting the boss and critting them. So you'll just have uptime and usefulness in a part of the game that it didn't before.
Okay.
Next, for Paragon, we're going
burning.
to talk,
What do you
let's
mean?
see, these are a lot of the defensive changes that we talked about. So you've
maybe
got
the
some damage
different types of
reduction
burning,
increases
so
to a lot of the
firewall,
glyphs and nodes across the board.
fireball,
Again, we're targeting
meteor.
that late game survivability for the Sorcerer. Another one that kind of opens up more ways to play and just makes it more usable is the Searing Heat Legendary node. This one is when you cast Fireball or Meteor, now it just increases your crit strike chance across the board for 5 seconds, so you can get that crit strike and use it on any of your skills rather than only on them.
Yeah, damage reduction is actually like extremely strong in
Yes.
Diablo 4.
It's really, really good.
Yeah.
So these things should be pretty impactful.
Yeah.
From 10 to 15%.
Next
Okay.
one.
A little more
All right, so
survivable, I
here
guess.
we've got some more Paragon nodes. Again, damage reduction across the board. Keep in mind that also on some of the rare nodes you can see them twice in a board rather than only once for the glyphs. So that means that this is actually like doubled if you go for both of them. And then we're also increasing the maximum life bonus on a couple of nodes. Again, just targeting that late game survivability. And now legendary, so there's a lot to chew on here.
There's your first one, Serpentine.
Yep, there it is. That's one we talked about before. So now you can have a Hydroactive, and instead of the duration being decreased, it's actually being increased.
24%.
Next, we've got some, again, damage buff numbers to things that are underperforming. Aspect of 3 Curses is one that I'm particularly excited about. Before, this one used to be that it only increased your crit damage of Meteor only, and only against healthy enemies. So it was one skill and only healthy enemies. Now it's going to work on Meteor and Fireball, and you get half of the bonus all the time, and then an extra bonus against healthy enemies. So now you can use this in builds that you weren't able to at all before. The next one is pretty good, is Gravitational Aspect. This one was it used to reduce your damage in exchange for the lightnings orbiting around you. Now we're going to increase it. So again, that's a pretty big swing in power. Next, we've got Recharging Aspect. This one was kind of similar to the change that we did to Chain Lightning to that bonus baseline. It used to only give you mana when it bounced off of you. Now it's going to give you mana when it bounces off of everything. So again, a lot more useful.
Wow.
And in combination with that, Unbroken Tether and Chain Lightning players are going to be eating pretty this patch. We're also increasing the bonuses of Chain Lightning that you get when that proc happens. So lots of Chain Lightning bounces. They give you lots of things. Should be really fun. We're also putting a new legendary into the game. This is the Mage Lord's Aspect. This one makes your Veer's Mastery Key passive, the damage reduction there, be increased by quite a bit so that you can survive when you're in that melee range. And let me see here, some Snow Veiled Aspect is getting a pretty big generic buff, where before it just gave you Unstoppable when you used Frost Armor. I believe it's got to be Frost Armor.
Bonus
And
damage.
then, but now it also gives you
11%
bonus
to
armor when you use it as well,
30.
just generally more useful. Incendiary Aspect terrifies me, but we're doing it. This one used to be that it procced off of all of your burning damage. So your burning damage could give you mana, and now it's going to just do it off of your Pyromancy skills damage. So this opens up Meteor, Fireball, all of those other skills that aren't really Firewall.
I feel like the Lightning Sorc and the Fire Sorc got huge buffs.
Illuminator. This is the one where your fireballs bounce and deal AoE damage. Before, when you got this, it was kind of in a very weird place where the bounces could do it pretty often in such a way where you'd only hit an enemy once with a bounce. And we have to put this damage penalty on it because, you can hit enemies multiple times with it, and it's AoE, and gives you a bunch of procs of all of your stuff, so it's really, really strong. But because you could only hit an enemy once, a lot of times this was just a damage nerf for your character.
Yeah, you'd bounce it one time on a monster, and that was that.
And now you got nerfed for getting unique, right? That never feels good. So we reduced the distance that it bounces a little bit, so it should be more easier to consistently hit an enemy twice. And then we also reduced that damage penalty, so now no matter what, if you hit an enemy twice, it's a damage bonus. And then we also replaced one of its affixes from damage to stunned to lucky hit to restore resource. And since this thing, bounces and hits enemies a lot of time, the lucky hit procs are very powerful with this. So we think this will be a lot more attractive for players.
Interesting.
All right, moving on to the Barbarian. So, like I said before, we're increasing the Fury generation of all of those basic skills. So you're just going to get more Fury in the early game so that you can, do that basic core skill loop a little more often, so it should be more fun. Double Swings gain a damage buff, Ruptures gain a damage buff, Charges gain a damage buff, and one of the enhancements is increasing that vulnerable duration, so it should hopefully be more attractive.
One thing I do want to note is even on if we go back to the other slide,
Sure.
A lot of people are going Fury gain 11 to 13 and 10 to 13, and they're always noting well, that doesn't feel like a big number and so forth, but I think players...
By percentage, it's really big.
Yeah, by percentage,
it also
it's actually
scales
really
with a
big.
whole lot of other stuff. It gets spooky when we do too much in a percent-wise.
Exactly. So I think
because of how everything works in our game.
I think
Yeah, only
people
one thing I get used. Oh yeah, no,
they
didn't
buff
buff
but not realizing that
Cold Sorc at all.
It scales
because
with other
Cold
things and other,
Sorc was so much of a
and
CC
mixes in
freaking
with
fanatic
whether you,
that they
other gear
pretty
that
much
you have and so forth. So
this
is just the
nerfed it
baseline
and
number,
left it the way that it was.
And you have to remember
But
that
Lightning and
obviously when
Fire
that number gets
were
tweaked,
way
everything else
behind
gets tweaked, that gets
Cold
I want
Sorc.
to point that out too
So-
when we do damage increases where it might seem small because
Yeah.
it's increasing the base that everything else multiplies and scales on. It can be a bit. I mean, sometimes it's not as much. We can go and do it again, right? But it's scary and risky. So we have to think about that because it's very easy to be oh, just make it 20, and now late game you're just bashing once and then getting all your Fury back or something, right?
Right.
So. All right, so violent upheaval. This one gives you berserking, and it used to be that you had to damage 2 or more enemies or 3 or more enemies to get a better buff. And now we're adding bosses to that. So when you're in a boss fight, you're just going to be able to get and chain that berserking again, making it usable in a part of the game where it didn't used to be. We've also got gushing wounds is one I think worth calling out. This is the key passive. We're increasing the scaling of your bleed to crit damage, and then also your bleed damage when you
15%
overpower an enemy
bleed
is going up
damage.
significantly.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, so now when
From
you overpower
11
that
to
AoE bloodburst, it's
70.
actually going to be quite a bit of chunky damage.
What?
Walking
Holy
Arsenal is another one
crap.
worth calling out here. We heard some feedback that it's really hard to keep up all 3 of your weapon types when you're doing Walking Arsenal. Usually 2 is fairly easy. You can have a basic and a core that are different weapons, but getting that 3rd one to consistently happen, especially if you're using a cooldown skill like Charge or Leap or something like that, it can be hard to maintain that. So we're just increasing it to make it more forgiving, which should also increase all of those legendaries and other powers and uniques and stuff.
That was possible for me when I had Deathblow charges, but whenever I was only running like 1 Deathblow charge at a time, like that build just didn't.
Yeah,
really come
Deathlow's
on.
Wow,
probably one of the easier ones to get, and even then it can be a little hard,
Bleed
right?
Barbarian
Yeah, for sure.
got
This is great. It
buffed.
opens up a lot.
Yeah. So next, let's talk legendaries. Let me see. One of them, the aspect of Unrelenting Fury here, is one worth calling out, where again, you're going to get a benefit when hitting bosses, so now it's useful in a part of the game that it wasn't used in at all. Another one is the aspect of, or the 2 earthquake aspects there at the bottom, Bulkathos and Earthquake. We're increasing the amount of damage reduction and damage bonus, so if you want to do that earthquake build, like I said before, we want those earthquakes to do damage and be meaningful, but in the meantime, while you're standing in them, those buffs on you are going to be a little bit more powerful, so hopefully we can incentivize people to go through that fantasy. All right, next, so uniques. We've got a lot of stuff here with Barbarian uniques. Again, the kind of a high-level goal here is we're generally improving just the base thing the unique does, and then also trying to replace an item stat that wasn't very attractive or not as attractive with one that we know players really, really like to make these meaningful for them. So Fields of Crimson, this is the one where you do blood pools when you rupture enemies. We're increasing the damage. We're increasing the damage that enemies take standing in pools, which is a pretty big buff. And then we're also changing the rupture cooldown reduction with bonus crit strike damage. And again, combine that with the bonus in the key passive where the
From
bleed
11 to
damage,
70, right?
yep, where that scales better. That'll just be quite a bit more damage across
That's awesome.
the board. Hellhammer we talked about. Ramalandi's Magnum Opus, we're replacing the physical damage affix with vulnerable damage. 100,000 steps. The base affix of the boots, we're replacing the evade cooldown affix with just more evade charges. And then we're also replacing the damage against stun enemies with bonus movement speed, which you'll see a couple times in boots that we're doing because we know how attractive that stat is.
Let's talk about.
sorry.
So, I was just going to say we said that we were going to buff Sorceress and Barbarian. We're going to make some changes in 1.1. But Adam, you've been working on. We don't want to leave the other 3 classes out, right?
Yeah, totally.
Most of these changes are that you've seen are for Sorc and Barb. But I think we had some time to make some changes to the other classes
We
too.
totally did, so we can go on here. One thing I do want to call out, though, the focus of the patch is the Sorcerer and the Barbarian, so you're going to see a lot more for them, but we wanted to give the other classes something exciting as well. Rogues are actually, I think, eating pretty well right now, so they're pretty good, but we still found some things of underused things to buff.
There you go, Slick.
Probably one of the more big ones here is Forceful Arrow. We're changing the functionality here so that every time that you cast, third cast of the arrow just pierces all enemies, which is a pretty big just generic bonus. We got some feedback on Rain of Arrows that it was kind of weird that the second wave was the one that knocked all the enemies down, because a lot of times, you cast a skill and the combat is in a certain state where the enemies are where you want to hit them and probably where you want to CC them, because you usually want to group stuff up to CC them. But because it happens on the second wave, the first wave comes,
Well, yeah, of course. It's
does
going
a
to be
little
stuff that
damage
normally
to
doesn't get
everything.
used, going to get
And then they
buffed.
all
So it
move,
might be something to try
everything
out.
goes and falls apart,
Like, I
right?
think
So
I'm going
this
to go
just makes
Fire
it more
Sword.
reliable.
Or Lightning Sword. I don't
It
know.
sets itself up.
They
It
got
sets itself
buffed.
up. Yeah, exactly.
Being able to shoot lightning and
Here,
it
let
being
me
able
look if
to
there's
chain
anything
and give
noteworthy.
you mana
There's
back,
some
you
buffs
just
to
keep
things that are
spamming it.
underused.
That might be very strong, man, in a group play.
So the aspect of Elusive
So,
Menace
I may
no
switch
longer
it up and go
requires us to
lightning.
be from close enemies. So again, we're just making things more
So I barely open
generically
up the
usable.
Paragon board.
And then for uniques, kind of similar to Barbarian, we found some room here to make a couple stats replaced with things that we know are really, really attractive. So in Wind Force, we replaced the all stats affix with bonus vulnerable damage. And then the Word of Hakan, we replace ultimate damage with cooldown reduction. So Druid, kind of similar to what I said about the Barbarian, about that early game kind of feeling a little bit slow.
Yes, 'cause
We're
the
also
Druid
improving
needs help
all of
with
the spirit
spirit.
generation of
Jesus
the
H.
Druid's basic skills. So across the board, you're just going to be able to get to those core skill casts a little bit easier. We're also improving the passive damage generally of a lot of their companion skills. So your wolves are going to feel better. The both passive and active damage is
Active
going
damage
up.
increased
The
from
upgrades for the
110 to
wolves are all going to be a little bit
135.
more powerful.
Enhanced wolf pack. Damage increased. Oh,
And then
negative
same thing for
20
ravens, their
to
passive
something.
damage is going up. And then brutal ravens, this is the one that gives you another little, a couple more little ravens to go peck your enemies to death. They're also going to peck a little bit harder, so a little bit more
40%.
fantasy fulfilling there, I think.
Oh. Uh-oh. Huh? E? Do I still got you guys in chat? They froze? It seems like either Twitch is having an issue. I don't know.
Just if I want to do pure
There it
poison
is.
druid, it's a little bit behind, so we're really targeting rabies as a pretty meaty upgrade there in its damage. This will also, by the way, improve the legendary, I think it's legendary where your wolves can cast rabies. That's also going to be improved by this. So just that whole archetype will be better. And then for legendaries and the class mechanic, we're just buffing some things that are a little bit underutilized, so they'll just be stronger. And then Necromancer, so here we've got quite a few things going on. Bone Spirit, this is the enhanced Bone Spirit, which is where when you crit enemies with the Bone Spirit, you get cooldown reduction. We're increasing that from 6 to 7 seconds, so it should be a little more friendly to players in this current state of the game. The Wither legendary upgrade here, this is the one where your shadow dot damage is going up. And we added a new way to scale that damage in the legendary space. We got feedback that this really just wasn't scaling enough to be meaningful, even when you invested a lot into willpower. So now you're just going to get a lot more bang for your buck. You're going to do, the requirement is less, so you're going to get more procs of the increase to your damage and chance to proc that damage. And then also just your bonus damage straight up is going to be better. So the shadow builds should be a lot better. Empowering Reaper, we got some feedback that totally makes sense to me now, and a year ago me should have thought of this. But the way that this used to work was Sever would spawn a pool of blight under enemies, and the chance was based on you critting them. So the idea was you would create a crit build, and then you turn your crit into these pools of damage, right? That sounds kind of cool. But it turns out, crit doesn't work with dots at all. So that pool doesn't get scaled with the way that you make the pool. So it just doesn't work design-wise. I take the blame for that. But now we're changing it so you
That's
just have
nice
to
to
damage
hear,
enemies
dude.
to spawn those pools of blight.
you're
So now this
taking
can actually be
whatchamacallit
more friendly to dot builds.
I'd like to hear it.
And then aspect of Exposed Flesh. This one used to have the same effect, but only when hitting vulnerable enemies with bone skills. So now you can just get we have a new resource mechanic for all the Necromancer specs that aren't bone. And then here, let me see, probably one of the big ones to call out, even though it's just a number buff, is Aspect of Torment. That Essence Regeneration was just woefully undertuned, so we increased it pretty significantly. Hulking Aspect, this one, I'm hoping gets to see more play. This used to be a resource legendary, which looking at it now, was a little weird, because it doesn't actually give you resource, it's just cooldown reduction on the golem skill. So we're going to move that to a utility. So now you can put this on your boots and other places that you didn't have to, and it doesn't have to take that prime ring slot to use this legendary. And then we're also updating the effect a little bit to be stronger. And then for uniques, kind of similar to what I said before, the Greaves of the Empty Tomb, we're changing the bonus intelligence affix to be replaced with bonus move speed, which I know is particularly attractive for Necromancer players.
Yeah, mobility for
Well,
necromancers.
yeah, well, Necromancers, they may want mobility a little bit. I heard
Usually
from some
the
people.
slower
Oh,
individuals
wow.
in the group. So,
Yeah.
They're
I'll
going to
put them out a
reduce
little
some of
bit.
the damage that the
Here, this is
minions
a
are
monster
taking,
change,
bro.
but it
That's
impacts
good.
minions really, so
Thank
Necromancer
you.
and Druid. But these attacks now from the Balrog and some elite affixes are going to be dealing reduced damage to Necromancer minions and Druid companions, so your pets will just die less often to these things. And then now we got some of our generic updates. We only have a couple of them. The first one is to a Malignant Heart. This is the Caged Heart of Spellbreaking. And this one used to say that when you took elemental damage, you gained damage resistance to that element, right? It was thematic to reducing only that element.
Yeah,
but we
thank you
found
for
that was
changing
really,
that,
really
'cause it makes
narrow.
no
Again,
sense.
trying to
Resistance
open things
doesn't
up so it's not so narrowly useful that you're not going to ever take it. So now it's just going to give you just generic damage reduction when you take elemental damage. And then our last one here for item updates is Temerity. So we got a lot of feedback on this one. It's funny because when we launched the game, we thought that this item was crazy and going to be really, really good. But then we realized due to the stats on it that it just wasn't hitting the attractiveness that we wanted. So even though this terrifies me, we're going to bump it up and see how it goes. But we're going to replace the all stats affix with bonus max life. The barrier is now also going to be scaling with your maximum life. And it'll probably be working with other barrier legendaries where you need a barrier to do certain procs and things. This will now proc with that as well. So we think this is going to be a pretty big buff to
that's
this item.
interesting.
Hopefully
Yeah,
we'll
do
see
more
it in
damage
your,
while you have a barrier.
Max life and
And then
increases
telemetry
achievements.
actually scales
Yeah,
off of
so
that
we have
and
a
life.
ton of updates
okay.
coming to the classes.
Yeah, a lot of
that we
stuff.
Interesting.
literally
A lot of
just went
stuff.
through. It's quite an almost like an encyclopedia of stuff that, especially on the barb and sorcerer classes. But I will say that it's nice that we got some stuff in for the rogue, necromancer, and druid players as well. Making sure that we kind of like buffed up some of the more undertuned stuff that we had seen.
Actually, one more caveat to all of that. I should have said this at the beginning. It's not final yet.
Not final
This
yet.
is
That's why
planned.
you probably saw the little
The
watermark
odds
on
are
it.
very high. We do 90% of it or most of it, maybe even all. But as we get into the weeds of things and we're updating things, some things may change. So this is our plan. It's very likely it'll be at least most of it, if not all of it. But it's not completely in the game yet. So
There might be
We-
some number tweaks, basically.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
always add a small caveat just because things are still going through testing right now on our side.
correct.
And we
It's
want to
going
make
through
sure.
testing, all that stuff.
Yeah,
so.
we want to make sure we're not completely.
I'm very careful. I always caveat, not final until you see it in the
Adam's,
game.
Adam's
but-
being very cautious about
Yes.
it.
I am very
It's
cautious
not
of
going to
it.
be. You're not going to experience something that's totally different from what you just
That's
saw.
right. That's
No.
why. That's also
It'll
why we're
be
not releasing
posted.
patch notes today, and we're going to actually discuss when patch notes will be released
We will.
later on
Yeah.
the stream. So
Yes.
we'll reveal that.
And one thing I do want to note is like because I'm seeing this like a little bit in chat and people are
Yeah.
going like, hey, you guys are adjusting some tweaks with like for instance like druid summons and their minions. Same thing with like there's a lot of questions about like, hey, what's the overall plan on like minion builds and so forth in the future? Is that something
boy.
you guys are still going to want to work on, look at in the future?
I
This
can
is
talk
not
about
just
this
a-
for a very long time. Yes, Druid and Necromancer are a little bit different, so I guess I'll talk Necromancer first. So Necromancer minions is absolutely a core fantasy of Necromancer players that minions are cool and awesome, and that you can raise the dead and have the dead fight for you. That is core. Minions, it turns out, in all games, not just ours, or summons or all that, are very complicated and hard to make work. They have a lot of moving parts that are different than every other class and build archetype in many games. They have AI, they have a passive and active component to them typically. There's a lot going on. So in this patch, we're not touching the Necromancer stuff a lot. It is on the team's radar of looking at the ways that they scale, looking at the ways that things proc with them, looking at just the combination of passive versus active activity that we want the player to do there. So there's definitely a lot going on there. We are thinking about it. There will be stuff coming, but no promises on when, but we are actively talking about it. Druid is a little bit different because from the ground up, the class fantasy is not only minions, right? It's like a specific build and way to play. One of the things that we were concerned about when launching the game is we didn't want the Druid to like have just as many or more companions than the Necromancer, and they're stronger. It's like, well, where's the fantasy of the Necromancer if the Druid does it better, right? So that was something that we contended with a lot. I'm sure that we're going to flex on that over time. We did add support. We still love companions on Druid, and we will absolutely be making it more of a thing, hence why we're buffing them a lot in this patch. But we are careful about the design space and the fantasy of the different classes, right? We don't want all the classes to be exactly the same because then you don't feel different when you're playing. You don't have new interesting mechanics that are between them. We talk about that a lot on the team. It's very easy to be like, hey, just this class doesn't have this and it's fun, give it to all the others, right? I think Necromancer and move speed is part of that, where we overcorrected a little bit, where like we didn't want them to have a teleport or dash, right, like a rogue. If Necromancers are dashing around everywhere, that's a weird fantasy, right? But not giving them enough movement speed options at all, I think, is something that we're coming back on.
Yeah.
So, but it's a push and pull, right? It's on a spectrum of how far do we go to go into another class's fantasy or an archetype that doesn't make sense fantasy-wise versus keeping true to the core and finding clever ways to fix it, or we can't fix it and we do need to bend a little bit.
Okay.
It's always a conversation.
It's also
Love
interesting
the
to see that
explanation,
the feedback,
man.
particularly on
This is
Druid
what we
companions.
want.
Like we knew that they were really cool, but like the number of Druid players who are looking for more ways to kind of make more companion-focused builds is maybe a little bit higher than we expected.
Yes.
So this is one of those situations where, like, kind of in response to the fact that players are really hoping, like, Druid players are looking to go after this fantasy of, like, I am the master of the animal kingdom, and I'm going to have all these and nature, right? I'm going to have all these buddies with me. I think it's kind of like moving our hand a little bit. It's like, oh yeah, actually, there is something really cool here. There is fantasy here for us to really latch onto, and more that we can do. But to Adam's point, it's still very important we make sure that the Necromancer feels distinct and the Druid feels distinct after these changes go in.
Correct. It's the eternal struggle for us on class design.
Sure.
Yeah. We also have a lot of like quality of life items that we wanted to talk about that we actually kind of hit on last week
Sure.
when we were talking on the campfire
might
chat
play,
that would be
Druid
coming
after
in
this buff.
1.1.1. And I know we wanted to talk a little bit more about those here. I know we have some changes coming for like monster density, for instance.
Yeah, I want to talk about monster density. So we've said a few times now that we're going to increase monster density in Nightmare Dungeons and Helltides. These changes are in 1.1.1, like we said last week. And I think we have an image of an example of a Nightmare Dungeon. This is how it is today.
Yeah.
If you go into Nostravis Deepwood,
I want to see the whole
of
thing
course,
red.
Monsters are going to not be exactly like this, but this is an example of it. And then in 1.1.1, it's going to change, so you can see a lot more monsters.
Oh, yeah.
here.
Okay.
There it is.
Okay.
And this is really going back to, we talked about our mission statement for the live game of after you've achieved your build, being able to go in and mow down large numbers of enemies, deal with large numbers of enemies. That's sort of a core part of an ARPG.
Interesting.
We want to make sure that we're delivering, especially in the end game content. So that's how to look for Nightmare Dungeons. On Helltide, we've been doing the same thing, increasing density. As I said last week, there are some areas of Helltide that are highly dense, and we want to make sure that all of our players across all of the different platforms that we support can enjoy this increased density. So it's not just the people with the absolute top-end equipment. So we've also been making sure that as we bump up these densities, that we're doing it in a way that performance stays reasonable. So you can actually, like, if we bump up density and then the game turns into a slideshow, we didn't actually make the game more fun, even though there are a lot of monsters. So it needs to stay performant at the same time. So we've been working on that at the same time so that we can really hit that target. And this is something too that, when 1.1 comes, 1.1.
1.1.1.
We gotta have
Triple one.
we gotta have a different name for these patches. For these patches, it's fine. When that comes out, we're going to be looking at the density there and seeing how close it comes to this mission statement, this goal, right? And if it's not hitting this goal, then we're going to keep working toward that goal.
Good.
So we
good.
we
Again,
really want to make
another
sure that it's
explanation.
capturing that fantasy of mowing
That's what we
down
want.
hordes of enemies.
Yeah, it's a great goal for us to line ourselves around too, right? So once we're able to capture more data from players on live, we can see how players with different like PC specs are able to interact with some of these spaces. It's going to continue to inform us and let us do more and more double down some of these decisions as we go.
And then I know we have some changes coming in regards to bosses and so forth as well.
That's right. So we didn't talk about this last week, but we have gotten a lot of feedback before about the about players, particularly like in World Tiers 3 and 4, fighting like dungeon bosses and world bosses, and being able to go in there with their enhanced power. Now they've got like some uniques online. Their build has really come online. And they've got like a lot of like damage to vulnerable targets. Like they're mowing through some of these bosses faster than we expect, right? So, or rather, fast enough that's not really challenging and not really engaging. So we are boosting the health of bosses in World Tiers 3 and 4. At brackets as you're kind of going up the experience. But in exchange for this, in exchange for making some of these pieces just a little bit harder as players are going through them, we are also going to be making a change to the rewards that you get going through these.
Yeah.
So now, like after 1.1.1 goes live, dungeon bosses starting at level 35 even, so this is before you can get into World Tiers 3 and 4. And then it's the, so once you've done that, or once you've killed those, you're going to have a guaranteed legendary item drop in that space.
Okay.
And that's going to carry up as well into World Tiers 3 and 4. When you complete a Legion event, that's going to also give you a guaranteed legendary drop starting at level 35.
Okay.
There's a chance before 35, but it's guaranteed at level 35. You're going to have one pop in. And then another Butcher has a 100% chance to drop a legendary as well, because he's a boss, of course. And then another really big one is we got, and this is funny. I did it. Please don't follow me on Twitter unless you really want to see a lot of nerdy stuff. But I did a Twitter poll a while ago where I basically just said what do you think is the chance at which a treasure goblin will drop a legendary item? And I said it was 10%, 25%, 40%, 50% with the 4 options. The majority of players voters, I should say, right, all selected 10% was the chance, and everybody had their own their feelings on it as they were kind of going through it. But the reality is at level, and I said level 50 treasure goblin as part of this. But the reality is they have a 50% chance to drop legendary items today, and that's going back to level 35. They've got a very, very high chance to drop legendary items. But
So what you're saying is sometimes I kill a treasure goblin and it doesn't drop a legendary item.
That's
Yeah,
correct.
that's what I heard.
That's exactly right. So basically, if you flip a quarter every 25 minutes, that's basically your chance to get a legendary item when you're fighting treasure goblins in the overworld. And it's very easy to have tails, 5 times in a row, and then
That's what happens to me every time.
And as humans, we are 7 times more likely to remember a negative thing than a positive thing. So this is nothing wrong with rather there's nothing wrong with the player's perception of treasure goblins not feeling rewarding. You don't see them that frequently relative to other content types, and when you don't get a legendary item from something called a treasure goblin, that can feel bad. So what we decided to do is we've gone back and said, starting right at level 15 for treasure goblins, 15, they have a guaranteed legendary item drop chance when you kill one from that point forward. Okay. So now when you see treasure goblins on the map, you start hearing them snortling around in the corners of your screen. You need to go fight that thing. You need to take it out. You need to get a legendary item from it. That happens very, very early. So we think that's going to be a really fun updates to kind of help get these things across. 50% isn't useful in this case. 100%, absolutely. We want you to feel like you're getting that power.
50%
No more
fun.
coin flip. No more coin flip.
Yeah, actually probably more than 50% more fun.
I will note,
100% fun.
Joe missed a wonderful opportunity to drag in Gabi, the goblin.
The treasure goblin
into the frame.
Should I try
We have
to
a
pull
plush
this in?
treasure goblin just off screen.
We have a very large plush.
Here's
he
this
is.
giant treasure
There
goblin
he is.
that
Look-
absolutely doesn't fit on camera
Look
at
how
all.
happy he is.
And
that
now
he-
he's off
Happy
camera.
to
He's
give you
legendary.
loot now.
Staring at Joe as he's literally talking
Yeah,
about.
we have a lot of other stuff to discuss.
Staring at Joe
Very
as he's
important.
literally talking about killing him. So yeah.
Yeah.
They're happy to be of help.
It is a plush creature. So yeah.
I know, and so we talked more about, or you actually, when we were on the stream last week. Sorry, about 2 weeks in a row, you guys. We talked about respecs and so forth. So I know that is also coming in.
Yeah,
in 111.
we just want to confirm that the stuff we said last week, we're going to reduce respec cost by 40%. Players are going to get an extra stash tab, and Elixir stack count is going to go up to 99.
Yeah, and the stash tab is just purchasable by gold.
right.
So
So
that's just to make sure that people don't think we're just selling it.
Tab 1's 100K, Tab 2's 200K, Tab 3's 300K, Tab 4's going to be 400K. So you can buy that for your seasonal stash and for your eternal stash.
Yes, exactly. And then one other thing that we did want to talk about, because this was a question that came up last week in regards to the leaving dungeon options and teleporting out of dungeons and so forth. And I know you wanted to talk more about that here today.
I don't know. I think I explained it pretty well last time.
So clear.
So clear.
There's a loop there. I don't know why anyone's confused. This is very clear. I'm just kidding. We're going to change it back to 3 seconds.
Yes.
Basically, the reason that we increased this is we have, in Diablo IV, we have a mechanic where when you're casting some kind of spell or power and you get hit by some damage, you don't get interrupted immediately. You have to take about 5% of your health and damage before it gets interrupted. And this makes things like town portaling back to town, leave dungeon, etc. feel a lot better.
So people were town portaling, to
Saving
get out
a
of
prisoner,
damage.
absolutely. Yeah.
Every time.
So if you're taking really incidental damage, it's not going to get interrupted. But we were worried about a case where you're in the middle of a high-intensity combat fight or in the middle of a boss fight, and we felt like it was a little bit too easy to get out of that in terms, and that's actually what it's referring to with the loop, which again, I felt like I nailed it, but I guess and so there are other ways that we could have solved that, right? We could have said like, oh, well, you get pushback on your cast, or like, oh, well, it's only increased to 5 seconds if you're in a boss fight, or something like that. But ultimately, what players really accurately pointed out is, look, this slows down the core loop of the game in a way that's not fun.
Yeah.
So we're just changing it back to 3 seconds.
Yeah. So.
But it was only
was
2
it 3
seconds.
seconds?
Though.
Went to 5 seconds?
It doesn't
Going back to 3
really
seconds
matter.
because,
It's 2 seconds.
obviously
I don't
good
know.
player
I think
feedback
people are going a little
from
overboard when
everyone,
it comes
so-
to
We've got one more
Two
point to talk about too.
seconds,
So,
like-
so we've been getting a lot of feedback, obviously, on
I don't know.
the
I don't think it's a
in-game
big deal.
experience.
It's
Tier 3 and
whatever.
4, and
But okay, 3
Nightmare
seconds
Dungeons
now.
are a really
Cool.
big part of that. Last week we talked about how we were going to be ensuring that the Nightmare Dungeon difficulty was scaled more appropriately. So
right.
now, like the Tier 70 difficulty was the old version. Rather, the old version of Tier 70 is now the Tier 100 after the changes that we made to more accurately reflect the balance we have in Diablo
Every
4
second
versus the kind of insane overtuned stuff we had prior for the Tier 70 plus content. One other thing that we obviously are thinking about, like, the scaling difficulty is one part of this, but we also get plenty of feedback on on some of the Nightmare Dungeon affixes themselves. And we know that some of these are sort of ones you're going to want to basically throw in the trash right away. So you're going to want to salvage these and get Citadel Dust immediately upon when some of these things kind
they're
of pop
annoying.
up.
Some of
So a
them
couple
are
of the ones that
annoying.
we're actually going to be, for now, we're going to be removing a few of these as we think about reworking them or deciding what we want to do with them.
Okay.
But we're going to be taking these out in 1.1.1. They're not going to appear anymore.
Good.
That is so. The first is Resource Drain. It's not going to be showing up in Nightmare
Thank
Citadel,
you.
Citadels anymore.
Get rid of it.
Cold
It's terrible for
Enchanted
sorcs.
is not going to be showing up in Nightmare Citadels anymore for a bit. And then Backstabber is being removed as well as part of 1.1.1.
Okay,
now,
so
this
Cold
is not
Enchant,
by any
Backstabber, and
means
Resource Drain.
an exhaustive list of the things we'd want to adjust on the affix side. There's lots more that we want to do to kind of improve this experience. This is just sort of like while we're in here beginning to look at these things, we know that these are problematic. We have adjustments we want to make anyway. We want to go ahead and pull these out and just make the experience better today for players.
Yep. Cool. Awesome to hear. I know that a lot of players have been giving feedback about specific Nightmare Dungeon affixes
Yeah.
and everything. So it's great that we've been able to jump on a few of the ones that we know are problematic with the community and kind of pull them out and reevaluate and see what we can end up doing with those. So we did, obviously we talked about the date for the patch notes beforehand.
I don't know what you mean.
But we do want to specify that we are going to be releasing patch notes, full patch notes next week. It's actually going to be on August 2nd next week on Wednesday. We'll be releasing full patch notes. And then 1.1.1 is going to be coming out on August 12th, which is Tuesday. So players will... Did I get those
Okay.
dates right? Yes. I'm doing
I
this by
hope so.
memory. I'm
Honestly,
doing it
I
by
have
memory.
no idea. So.
I've seen so many calendars in the last day.
Tuesday after.
Oh, sorry. It is.
Oh,
No, I
I
lied.
think it's not
It is
the-
August 8th.
Yeah.
See, this is dates. Just
Everything's
flying
Yeah.
around.
right now.
August 8th.
Sorry.
'Cause that would have
August
been,
2nd
like, 2
is when
weeks
the patch
after
notes will
or
be coming
whatever?
out
Yeah.
in full, and then August 8th is when the patch will
Tuesday
actually hit.
after, yeah.
Sorry, I apologize. I've had
Okay,
a lot
but
of
at
dates
least
in my
it's
head
some
over the
time
past
to be
couple
able to
weeks,
look at
Buff
so,
the
stuff
dates.
before it goes
yeah,
live.
buff the
Buff
date.
the dates.
That's
Just
also
like
part of the patch
treasure
notes. So players will be able to see everything next Wednesday. We'll be posting those, so make sure to stay tuned. Of course, on the Diablo social media, etc. We'll end up updating the patch notes there, so players can see it. Just remember, the patch is not that day. We're just posting the notes early so that players can actually see them. This goes
Oh,
back
I
to
don't know,
exactly
man.
how we
I
were
guess
talking
it'd be
about that
Diablo
we want to better
headquarters, which is
communicate,
California, I
these
thought?
notes
I
here,
don't
similar
remember.
to how we're doing this here on this campfire chat. And then, of course, August 8th is when the patch will end up going live for all players so that they can
Yeah,
actually
Blizzard
experience it
headquarters? Cali,
and jump
I
through
think?
with all the changes that
Yeah,
we
Cali.
were kind of detailing out here, and they'll be seeing in the final patch
On Earth.
notes on Wednesday
Yeah, Cali.
next week.
It's 11 o'clock for them over there.
We do want to jump into Q&A because we just went through a whole bunch of stuff right here. I know one question that, as we start to populate questions, feel free to ask them in chat on Twitch, by the way, because we have chat enabled there. But I know one question, and something that we talked about last week as we're waiting for questions to kind of come in, was about XP in later game, or for late game players and stuff like that. Do we have any update and in regards to that specific topic?
Yeah, I can talk about that. So we did talk about this last week, and what we said then was that we are not looking to make the game feel slower across the board. We're not looking to slow down the players' XP gain rate in response to feedback about some of the other changes that we had made. The goal was really, we want to make sure the players are having a good time progressing through World Tiers 3 and 4, not feeling like they're hitting a point where it's really, really difficult to make progress. So in response to some of these thoughts, we had gone through and we had raise the amount of experience that you gain from before the 1.1 patch. When we raise the amount of experience gain you get from Nightmare Dungeon completion, from Helltide cache opening, from Whisper completion. Like, we went and did a good buff on those activities to make them feel juicier as part of that. And now we're going through and we're updating density inside the Nightmare Dungeons and in Helltide areas as well. So all this to say, we are committed to increasing the speed at which the players be progressing through these later world tiers. We're not happy with the speed at which players are getting through some of this content and the kinds of behavior incentivizing as a result of that, right? We want to make sure that players feel that they can play the way that they want and they can progress at a decent pace. But now that we've made a number of these changes, we do want to see what the impact's going to be on the overall XP gain rate across the board for players, and just seeing how different kinds of players are progressing, so that when we go through and we make changes, which we will be making soon, I think probably likely for season 2, when we go through and we make these changes, that's going to be informed by what we see players going through and what their experience is like now. So it's really just a question of like, how much are we going to make adjustments, like what's going to feel right, and that's going to be based on like what we see from players.
We have 2 people actually asking pretty similar questions, but one was specifically calling out Adam Jackson and his thoughts on this, but they both are very similar questions. One is from Febzilla, the other one's from Karnaga.
I'm so sorry. Can I just jump in really quick? Can I ask chat a question? Do you, yes or no, do you want Adam to read the names of people that he's getting the questions from the chat?
I think we should.
Adam.
Yes.
Okay, he's saying he should. Okay.
I think we should, just because I don't want to go into that whole situation where that other outlet made up names and we don't do that. So,
sure.
But Karnaga and Febzillas, they both ask about. People are all like, no.
I knew it. I knew it.
Yeah, this is terrible attitude.
It would make my job so much easier.
I know.
I wish I
Please
could.
finish your question.
Well, we're going to read these at least.
Read
But
these, yeah.
the question is about crowd control. Obviously, it is a huge and popular topic amongst the community. What are our thoughts about crowd control? What are we planning on doing about that here in the future?
I bet we all have thoughts on that, actually.
We do, yeah.
Yes.
Let me
You
just
can
say
jump on
first
that,
that we think that as you get into situations where there are lots of monsters on screen and high-end areas where the amount of damage that you're seeing going in and out is really high, so you're having to react really quickly. Situations where you're being hard CC'd, or like stun or freeze or something like that, can be much more impactful than they are when the intensity and the pace of combat is lower.
Yeah, of course.
And so we want to make changes to CC to make that experience more fun. We want to do that. It's not in 1.1.1, but those are changes that we're looking at right now.
Yeah. There's larger CC stuff that we're discussing internally that we want to kind of pair with a few of the big changes we have planned in the future.
In fact, we're working on stuff like that for that right now.
Yeah.
There is a question here regarding, it's my favorite question because I always get this, it's from Cookie Drops. So are you guys planning on addressing the issues related to like the imperfectly balanced on Necromancer, the decrep aura on Necromancer, and those are addressed in 1.1.1.
Yeah, we fixed it.
Those are, we just didn't list all the bug fixes and stuff
There's
like that.
There's a whole lot of bug fixes.
Yeah, so you guys will see those with the final notes and everything, but those are addressed in this specific update, and it's something that I know a lot of people have been asking, going like, well, I can only add 1 point, yet it says I can add 3, and so forth. So most definitely being addressed in that. We've actually just been getting a general decent amount of questions related to resistances and what the intent is going to be with resistances here in the future. There's a ton of questions, so lots of names. But I guess like, what's the vision on resistances here in the future?
I talked about it a little bit. The vision is kind of, I think, what the standard vision of most games is, which is everything is impactful and meaningful and feels good, and you invest and get rewarded for those things at all times. But reality is a little bit harder than that, but that is kind of the North Star in what we're trying to do. The idea is that when you invest in elemental resistances, you will notice a difference in the damage that you take. We don't want just armor or damage reduction or any like keen stat that is just way better than everything else. That's the only thing that you care about. It is tough to find a perfect balance there of how impactful some things should be versus others, and then can you negate certain kinds of combat when you max things out or only focus on only one thing, and there's a lot of gray area there that we're talking about, but our goal is that, and when we go and really take a deep dive at it, is one, we don't want you to just stack armor and that's better than everything else. We don't want you to stack just like general damage resistance and that's just better than everything else. We want elemental resistances to be meaningful, but we also don't want to get to a place where, you fight a fire boss and you stack all fire resistances and it actually can't hurt you. Right, there's always a push and pull in it.
The inverse of that is actually also really dangerous, which is that you're wandering through the game. You don't always know the kinds of creatures or affix. Obviously, you don't know the kinds of affixes you're going to be dealing with. You've got 0% poison resistance, and you get basically one tick from a level 60 poison creature kills you.
Sure.
Right. It's like there's a balancing act. The team is, as we move forward, everything that Adam just said is 100% accurate. We want to make sure that the choices between like armor for mitigation, for damage resistance based on passives, legendary powers, glyphs, and paragon nodes, those things are impactful, and that resistance plays a really, really important role. The big difference here is that resistance is a thing that you are going to stack and earn separately, and that they are usually tied to affixes or inherent affixes on rings and jewelry. So it means that some players will be able to go and encounter situations where they are not going to have a predictable amount of resistance when they go into an encounter, which means that we just need to think about what that is going to feel like for that player, and imagine a world where they are able to still complete the content, but it's much more effective to have the appropriate amount of resistance. We need to make that feel impactful. Yes. So there's going to be situations where we are going to ensure that if you are getting into a predictable fight against a creature that you know is going to be dealing a certain kind of damage, and you don't have resistance in mind when you go into that fight, you're going to be penalized for that. That's going to be a really, really difficult situation for you. But we are, trying to balance this against the general flow of Diablo 4 as it stands today, as opposed to trying to remake it into an entirely different experience.
Right. And to sort of get to I think the point of the question,
it's going to be difficult. There's just so many moving parts
I think
that they have to worry about.
Do you guys realize that resistances don't feel like they're hitting that goal right now?
That's right. Yep.
We do realize.
Yes.
We're gonna make changes to
Yes.
All right, sounds good. There is a lot of questions about mounts and how, we've gotten a lot of feedback about mounts. We've seen Carbot videos. Our friend Carbot Animation made an episode about mounts. Very funny if you haven't seen it. Highly recommend checking it out. But are there any discussions? Are you guys aware? What are you guys planning on doing in relation to mounts?
Yeah, there are a few changes here. So we want to make mounts feel better, sort of broadly speaking, and a couple of those things are making sure that the boost feels really good, especially with controller, where it's underperforming, and the boost actually, the boost mechanic on the mounts, it actually stacks. There's a bug right now with that on controller where it's not stacking properly. We're going to fix that, there's a few other. There's a key part of this is that the mount gets stuck on things, and that's
Barricade.
one of the things that barricade, for example. We in theory, the idea that you're riding through an area and some bandits or some skeletons have set up a barricade for you, and you have to sort of like dismount and fight all those skeletons, like that sounds like a fun idea.
Cool.
It doesn't exactly play out that way. You're just sort of annoyed, and you're like, well, can I kind of ride around the top of the barricade? And then it's a fight about whether the collision actually touches. Anyway, we're going to fix that. So there are some good changes to mounts coming soon in the future.
Awesome. And I know that I've been seeing this a lot as well in chat, and this is something I can answer, is I'm seeing a lot of people talk about VRAM, on PC and so forth, and how that obviously grows over time with certain players, not all players, but certain players with certain spec machines, and they eventually either have to force close or the game actually just ends up closing itself, and then they have to come back into the game. I know with patch 1.10, there was a update related to a memory leak that we ended up addressing, but then in 1.11, and I know that QA and so forth, our QA team has been working really closely with their graphics engineering team and testing out a fix that's going to be coming in there that should be helping out a lot of those players and making sure that VRAM stays stable throughout their gameplay and so forth. So that will also be in 1.11. It's a popular question. I know a lot of people have been hitting me up on that one specifically. There was a question earlier about overpower and the intent behind it, what like future plans and so forth.
Sure,
Kind
I
of
can
similar
talk
to
to that
the
one, yeah.
resistance questions. I think there's a lot of questions related to a lot of these things that we do plan on actually
Well,
addressing.
totally. They're fundamentally like how the game works, so I
Yeah.
understand. So the intent of overpower way back in the day was we really wanted to create a stat that was different than crit and felt meaningfully different that players could chase that had kind of a unique mechanic attached to it. Where overpower sits now is that I really like the idea of it. I think is really cool, which is it rewards you for building a really tanky character and you get a big hit of damage that's really, really awesome. It also scales off of your max health and then the current health percent that you have at the time, and then also scales with Fortify. So normally these stats aren't things that you want to scale to kill things, right? So we're trying to add another avenue, a vector to do that. And then the other thing that's unique about overpower and how we didn't want it to just turn into critical strike chance and damage like a lot of mechanics can be, is that you have a baseline low percent to do it, right? It's 3% across everything. And you can never increase that baseline percent ever. And that is a design choice and a goal. And then the idea is that you can, however, get guaranteed overpowers by doing certain mechanics. So the Druid has some, the Necromancer has some where it's like, hey, you do this thing and the next one is guaranteed. So you can still play around it, but unlike crit, where you're chasing the random chance to get higher and higher and higher to get those procs, overpower just naturally happens kind of rarely, and then the builds that can use it get it guaranteed. And then that you have different vectors and avenues to scale it. The problem right now with overpower really is not necessarily an overpower problem, but it's really the crit vulnerable problem of these other things that scale multiplicatively just overshadow overpower
Yeah.
in the same way that even dot damage is
It's
very
a
much
roll
lot
on
of times
gear that you just
overshadowed
roll
too.
off.
And so when we're looking at our revamp, the dream and the goal and the utopia we're moving towards is all of these vectors, and not even just overpower, but there's some other ones I know I'm thinking of that I can't, like those legendary affixes that spawn stuff is another example.
Oh, sure,
Adding
yes, yeah.
Like we want, when we give you a fantasy as a player, whether it's baseline or via legendaries and uniques, that you're able to build that into the late game and it's delivered on, and you can actually scale and be just as good as anybody else. That's the goal. That will always be the goal that we move towards. We're not there yet, obviously, but that's kind of the intent. Is overpower is another stat that you can actually chase meaningfully via lots of other stats too that it combines with to make a build, and that's kind of the point.
Awesome. And then
yeah.
this is a question that I know everyone talks about.
Actions, man.
I don't
Actions
know
speak louder
if
than
this
words.
group up here can fully answer it, but it's something
we're
that we
getting
can
some
follow
stuff.
up on, which is
So that's good. It's good to hear.
zooming in and zooming out on your character,
Ooh.
getting a wider look of gameplay
God,
and so
yeah.
forth. I know there's like performance implications to that because it increases the draw distance and so forth, and we have a ton of different platforms, so it has to be evaluated in any type of way if we were to make that type of change. Because even when it does zoom out on bosses and so forth, there's like some resolution or scaling and so forth that kind of occurs there. That's Please don't kill me, engineers, if I'm saying that wrong. But maybe that's another topic we can bring up during like another campfire chat with engineers, possibly to maybe clarify a little bit on that or so. Or we can just follow up separately after the campfire chat. But I know that's a question that a lot of people have been asking. And then there's questions regarding are there any additional options for customization down the road that you guys are looking at, like pets or wings, etc. I know it's
First
something
person
that
and
we're
third
looking at
person.
and evaluating, just
Yeah.
depending on like player feedback. Right now, we're very focused on, obviously creating additional more content for players
Yeah.
to play through.
Let me play
at
first
the
person and
moment,
third person.
more so than some of the cosmetic pieces and so forth. But it is something I know that players have been asking for.
Yeah, we want to add more stuff like that. That stuff is really fun to add. But we felt that right now what was really important is helping sorcerers, helping barbarians, and some of these other buffs to classes.
And I think there's, we'll do this one last question here before we end the stream. But one thing that people have been asking about is like all the changes that they're seeing today. Is this like encapsulating everything that we're doing? We had a question in here regarding, like, for instance, someone enjoyed playing a frozen orb sorcerer in like Diablo II, for instance, and wanting to have that same type of fantasy in Diablo IV. Do you guys plan on doing additional adjustments in the future regarding other builds or other, like creating variability across that?
Sure, no, absolutely. This patch, I talked a little bit about like we have our short-term goals and long-term things we're thinking about. Forevermore long-term, really, infinitely long-term, is the idea that, every fantasy that we sell you, and I can talk a lot about. I talk to the team about this all the time.
And by sell, we
Yeah, all right. Yeah, sell is probably the bad word. But I think that we've like
We're
when
advertising it. Like if you see it on legendary
Every
aspects,
fantasy-
if you see-
That's really what I
if you
mean
see it on
is-
passives, you see it on
Yes.
skill tags. Like we're saying, like, hey, look, this is a cool thing for you
when
to
we
go after.
show you something that is cool and awesome,
Yeah.
we deliver on it, right? Like when you log into Necromancer, you see right away just when you see your basic skills, like, hey, there's a bone thing, a shadow thing, and a blood thing, right? And then there's army stuff. All of those things should be delivered on and be awesome. And then as you go through the game, when you get legendaries and uniques, you should unlock, one, double down and make those things really cool, and two, unlock more things that are awesome. And what our goal always is that all of these things are awesome and cool. When we find something that isn't hitting the mark, we either buff it or redesign it in such a way that it's
Yeah,
that it's
that
hitting
it
the mark
does
and
hit
it's
the mark.
attractive and ideally really fun and exciting for players to chase. Like that's always what we're going to be trying to
I
do.
want to chase multiple builds.
So
not
yeah,
just
this isn't
one
exhaustive
freaking
forever.
build,
We are
man.
always going to be adapting and updating things. And if something just really isn't working, even if it's like something that I made, I have no hubris about like, hey, that thing, it was awful. Make it something good, right? Like at the end of the day, the players are the ultimate judge, jury, and executioner for us. Of
Exactly.
like, did it work? Is it
You know
good?
what I
Is it
really
fun?
like this
Yes or
dude.
no? If not,
I
then
really
we
like
have
this
to
guy. He
be,
gives good
malleable enough to
explanations.
change that.
Right, and we could be looking at data
And
too. We could be
it's like
seeing like,
he's
how many
not
players
afraid
are
to say,
picking what
"Hey,
kinds
man,
of
if I make a
passives, what
mistake,
kind of
it's
aspects
my
they wear,
mistake."
and what kind of uniques they're
Like,
using.
I
Like,
take
and
it.
we can say, you know, it's
I
like
like
we
that
know
guy,
when like
man.
if no one's equipping a particular aspect, like we can see that, but like okay, well that's clearly something we're gonna need to want to rework or update or
Yep.
buff or do something with, right? Like this, to Adam's point, it is a never-ending process. You know, we keep talking about how, you know, we're all here trying to make Diablo IV the very best game that it can be. And the reality is this is through iterations of the conversation with the community and also looking at this kind of data.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, we have a ton of changes here coming up for 1.1.1 that you guys got to see here, especially for class changes. Thanks, Adam, for kind of walking us
Yeah,
through
totally.
everything.
Yeah.
And, we do have final patch notes coming next Wednesday. That is August 2nd. So just a
Revealed.
reminder on that. Revealed full, where
Yeah.
people can read through them and provide full feedback and so forth. And then, of course, that's my tick. Someone called out my tick earlier, and so forth. Stop it, Adam. That's my tick. I will stop that one day. I probably won't. But we actually do have our patch for 1.1.1. The date will be on August 8th as well. So players can expect patch notes next Wednesday, and then of course 1.1.1 hitting on August 8th, which is Tuesday. So looking forward to seeing everyone's feedback, everyone jumping in, and checking out, of course, the new changes coming to pretty much every class now in regards to
Yeah, need more
balance
devs like
changes
him
and
in
so
gaming,
forth.
yeah.
Oh, I did
It's
it
okay.
again.
And so forth.
Now you're in your own head.
Now,
Be like
now, I'm, in
clap
my,
every
now,
time I
now I'm
hit
just
it.
stuck in this like my own empty room saying it over and over. But anyways.
And get us feedback on how this went, like and how
Yeah.
you like this format for talking about patch notes.
Exactly. Yeah, we want to see if this works out really well with the community. So yeah, please provide feedback. Us going through the notes and of course releasing the notes afterwards. It's a huge help for us and how to communicate with you guys out in the community. So thank you guys again. We hope you enjoyed this Campfire Chat ++, New Game ++.
Sure.
And we will see you on our next stream, which we haven't announced on. We're thinking about doing some Campfire Chats with like maybe other teams here, whether it's our art, animation teams, audio teams, and so forth, just so you guys can see kind of a deeper look into some of the development within our seasons and Diablo IV from other people. So we do plan on expanding these a little bit more, and of course, having Campfire Chats and dev update streams to talk more about the game, gameplay, and design, and so forth.
Got him.
You did it again.
Thanks. I hope you guys have a great weekend. Thank you again from the Diablo 4 team here at Blizzard, and yeah, have a great Friday.
Thanks, everybody.
Okay. Hey, I think that was good. I think we learned how they're going to be changing some of the sorcs issues, some of the barbarians issues, how potentially a lightning sorc is going to be more viable now, how potentially a barbarian bleed, even though it was pretty strong, is going to be even stronger now. The changes to aspects, the changes to legendaries. I mean, 1.1.1 is going to be a very, very good patch. They're going to give us 5 days to look at the patch, to go through it, to hypothesize on it, and then give feedback. So I think this was a win-win stream. I mean, I'm gonna probably have to watch it back again and kind of see like some of the more finer details. But I think on a surface level, I think it was good. This is what we want. This is what we want. I really appreciate the dev saying, hey, if I do something that doesn't quite look like it works, I'm not the type of hubris person that I'm going to be like, well, I think it works, so screw y'all. He's willing to take like constructive criticism and feedback. That is always what you want from a development team. So I think it's a win-win. I think it's a complete win. So I will take this information and let's wait for patch 111. 111. Let's wait for patch 111.